Hello everyone and welcome back into the GSMC Dead Ball Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. My name is Christopher Shepard. Thank you all for tuning in on this lovely Friday afternoon. But even though it is a lovely Friday afternoon, it is semi-bittersweet because this will be my final episode, not just with the GSMC Dead Ball Sports Podcast, but with the GSMC Sports Network. It truly has been such an incredible journey, a wild ride, my first ever experience, kind of having my own show talking all things sports, whether it be starting off talking all things fantasy sports, transitioning into now talking about every sport you can possibly think of. It has truly been an incredible ride, so thank you all first and foremost for joining me through this journey with GSMC. I really appreciate all the people who have commented on my videos, left their opinions in the comment section while I'm live streaming. Each and every single one of you has contributed to this journey in a positive manner, so I thank you very much for that. I thank everyone around GSMC, and I'm going to do something different here. I'm not going to tell you to like, follow, and subscribe because I've already told you 1,000 times before. What I am going to tell you is to go show some love to my former co-workers who are now going to be my former co-workers because they have been doing incredible things with this network for even longer than I have. You have two established veterans still there in Jeremy Lapidus and Kenneth Grunfelder doing their own sports shows as well. Very knowledgeable guys. I wish them nothing but the best in their careers. And then a kind of new guy on the block, Matt Quinn. Go check him out. He is our new host of the GSMC Football Podcast. Show him some love. Then we'll always have our main man, Eric Rodriguez, as he's known around GSMC, Evil E, holding it down on Mondays and Tuesdays with the GSMC Wrestling Laureate Podcast. So still a lot of talented people doing great things at the network. So I ask you and implore you really to go support them because I truly appreciate what they are doing as well. But we have a great show ahead. We're going to be talking a lot of MLB, we'll be doing some NHL, we'll be doing some basketball, and concluding with perhaps my favorite sport to talk about, as always, European football, as they call it over there. Without further ado, let's just jump right into it. Thank you all for the journey. We have one more show to get through, so let's kick it off right. Let's talk about the Dodgers for a second. We've talked about how the Mets and the Yankees can win the World Series this year. Let's talk about the defending champions, because this roster did not get any weaker. And in fact, a lot of you might be skeptical as to why I'm continuously hammering home the point that this team can repeat. And I don't need another 12-minute segment from me. But I just want to show you how well run an organization any sport can be when everyone, whether it be the front office, the players, all on down throughout the organization, invest in a team properly. This is not a team that suddenly caught fire. This is a team that has been around in the MLB for the past decade and a half and will continue to do so because they continuously stockpile the talent to do it. So without further ado, let's talk about why it's not so far-fetched to think that the Dodgers can repeat this season. Let's start off with the crazy and perhaps incredible to several off-season that they were able to manage. Let's start off with the pitching, because Roki Sasaki is someone who comes into LA with so much experience in the Japanese professional league, but is still viewed as an amateur, may not even be on the major league roster immediately. There might be a chance where the Dodgers keep him in the minor leagues for the time being, call him up potentially mid-season, and he would be a regular in the rotation. But because he was so willing to enter free agency in the MLB as an international amateur, and potentially being someone who the Dodgers grow a little bit before he enters this very star-studded rotation, that should scare a lot of people. Because the fact that they were able to get someone who's already so polished and has achieved so much abroad and bring him in and potentially not even start him right away is crazy to behold. And oh yeah, he's not the only pitcher they signed. Potentially one of the best pitchers of this generation, Blake Snell, a lefty that they can utilize in so many different ways at the top of the lineup. Bring him into the squad as well. And then, when you think about something that the Dodgers do really well, it's retain talent. This team is able to retain talent because they want to remain with the culture and identity the Dodgers have built for this past decade and a half. They're able to retain Tommy Edman, one of the best defensive players in this squad, Kike Hernandez, the ultimate glue guy, and several other players as well. These guys may not even be the best players on this team when all is said and done, but they are role players who buy into the Dodgers culture so much and have ingrained themselves within this squad that it would be insane to think of an LA Dodgers team or lineup without them in it. So that just goes to show how much the front office appreciates even the role players on this squad. Obviously, you have a great top three in your batting order as well with Freddie, Mookie Betts, and Shohei Ohtani, who now is also pitching himself to further add misery and compound all these opposing teams' misery to the order. So you have such a star-studded team. But the incredible thing the Dodgers were able to do is add depth to this team. When you think about depth for a team like the LA Dodgers, they probably don't even need depth to win upwards of, say, 95 to 100 games. But they added it. They added Michael Conforto to the outfield and Ha-Seong Kim to the infield. So now you have so much talent in both the in and out fields that you can make two LA Dodgers lineups. Maybe one would miss the playoffs just because there are a couple players who may not be able to carry the load for a team throughout a 162-game season. But legitimately, two Dodgers lineups could come out of the roster they've built and constructed. So kudos to GM Andrew Friedman, first and foremost. An incredible front office general here with the Dodgers who was able to construct this team in his own image and really extend their championship window far longer than any MLB team could possibly hope for. I mean, yes, you think, well, in COVID, when they won that championship in that shortened season, it wasn't for real, and it took them until now to win their first quote-unquote legitimate championship since the early 80s. But think about this, though. They've had a stranglehold in the AL West, which, yes, could get more competitive as the years go on, but they've won this division 12 years straight. They still are a team that once they get to the postseason have the experience now to continue to win championships. And even though a lot of people would probably think they should have won more earlier in this quote-unquote dynastic run, it doesn't matter as long as you can continue the longevity of this championship window. Because that's what's important to me. If you're a baseball team and you have this level of talent, you have to think that right now you are untouchable. And that's what the Dodgers truly think. By being able to add depth to an already elite team, both offensively and defensively, be able to retain perhaps the top three players, or at least hitters, in Major League Baseball, in my humble opinion, in Freeman, Betts, and Ohtani. To be able to add a guy from Japan who technically might be willing to start his career in the minor leagues and one of the best pitchers of his generation in Sasaki and Snell, to have a bullpen that could dip into the well of starting players if need be, but is still deep enough to win you baseball games late in the contest with guys like Treinen and such. I really believe that it's not far-fetched to think that the Dodgers will have a stranglehold on at the very least the National League for the next 5 to 10 years. Yes, we have to consider the Mets signing Soto, having their own approach. You have to consider, in fact, most of the teams in the NL East. The Phillies. How about the Braves? Maybe even some teams in the NL Central who approach this from a more small ball aesthetic might continue to rise. The Brewers could still stick around. And then, within your own division, a team like Arizona definitely projects to be a strong contender for years to come in the National League. But I want to hammer home that if the LA Dodgers were to split their team in half, this would still be a team that would dominate the league. And here's why. Even if injuries befall them along the way, I wouldn't be too concerned unless it's someone in their pitching staff, so to speak, because that pitching staff does worry me a little bit in terms of how long some of these pitchers have sat out over recent years, especially guys like Glasnow and Kershaw. But in the grand scheme of things, this Dodgers team did not go out into free agency and say, we can continue to get better just because. They know that they are the best team in baseball on paper and potentially on the field. But they want to ensure that everyone is reminded of that. And so, by building this juggernaut, you would have to think that anything outside of, at the very least, a run to potentially the NLCS and the World Series and maybe being runners-up would be a disappointment for LA this season. That's just how potent we've come to see them. So ultimately, even though it is frustrating to hear the LA Dodgers, all the hype surrounding them, if you're not a fan of them, it's still a team that has to be on everyone's lips at a certain point in time and will be throughout the next 5 to 10 years. But let me know what you think of this Dodgers squad and their chances of being the first back-to-back champions since the 98 to 2000 Yankees, because coming up next, we're going to transition to a more broad topic, talking about the 5 most desperate teams to win a World Series, the teams whose championship windows are seemingly wide open, but still need to win in order to cement themselves as true contenders for years to come. We'll be right back after this short break to continue on my last show.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits, some losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip, you choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Hello everyone and welcome back into the final show here at the GSMC Dead Ball Sports Podcast. And for a second segment, before I get into it, I do want to remind you, if you're just coming in, that even though I am leaving, there are still a lot of talented veteran people with the GSMC Sports Network doing incredible things. We talked about Jeremy Lapidus and Kenneth Grunfelder will be the guys to go to if you want to hear about all things sports, football, basketball, hockey, what have you. They are established veterans here with the network. And if you want a little bit more new blood, a guy who talks all things football and does it well, Matt Quinn is our new GSMC football podcast host. So check them out. Even as I am leaving, support the network. It is genuinely appreciated. I guarantee it. So thank you in advance. But without further ado, let's get into our second segment of today's show, talking about the 5 most desperate teams in win now mode who feel like they need to win a World Series in the next 3 to 5 years to have any optimism about the current runs they are on. Now, what I mean by this is some of them have opened their championship window fairly recently. Some might be seen as closing rapidly. But these 5 teams have all, in many different ways, defined the past decade or so in Major League Baseball and could define it in the long-term future. And if they don't win a championship within the window I'm projecting for them, then it would be seen as a large disappointment by everyone on this list. So without further ado, let's just jump right into this segment. Starting off with the number 5 team, there are going to be a lot of teams from the NL East on this list. And this team are starting to become very, very eerily similar to a team that actually won a World Series and then did not do anything at the turn of the 2010s after. We're talking about the Philadelphia Phillies here. And the Phillies are a team that seemingly have to break through within the 13 years of the Bryce Harper era. Because if they don't, Bryce Harper would be a fantastic player, one of the best players of his generation, but he would be without a ring. And so they have the nucleus right now to contend in the NL at the very least. They have Schwarber, Real Muto, Turner, Alec Bohm coming into his own finally. But if they don't want to be like the 2008 to say 2012 Philadelphia Phillies, who at the very least have a ring to back up their run of dominance, they have to find a way to break through. It's only going to get a little bit more difficult as the NL East gets better. And don't forget about the team we mentioned before, the LA Dodgers. This is a team that I feel has all the tools, all the traits, everything required to be a World Series contender. But time is running out on that Bryce Harper contract. Before you know it, Bryce Harper is no longer going to be a Philadelphia Philly, and he may just retire after his contract expires. So you have to win a World Series in the next 7 years at the very least if I'm Philly, in order for me to not think of this as a failed project. They've been so close, but they've seen teams pass them over the years. They've seen the Padres, the Dodgers potentially, the Braves and Mets now coming up behind them in the NL East. Try and surpass them, and they have in recent years. If the Phillies want to stay within their championship window, they're going to have to produce, and everyone has to support Bryce Harper in his chase for that elusive ring. So the Philadelphia Phillies coming in at number 5 on this list. Coming in at number 4, the New York Yankees, a team that were ever so close to picking up their first World Series title since the late 2000s. But the Yankees, to me, are a team that could be on the fence with, that I personally could be on the fence with in terms of needing to win a World Series. Because this is a team that's now entering new horizons, maybe unfamiliar territory to a lot of people in their fan base. I genuinely believe with the signings they made, they're going to be a much more defensive-minded team. You don't sign guys like Paul Goldschmidt and Cody Bellinger right now, at the very least, within their careers, to be your power hitters. You sign them because you have a young nucleus with your infield and outfield defensively that needs that support. And these two are veteran guys who have won Gold Gloves in the very recent past and still have enough defensively to contribute to your team whilst also mentoring these young guys. So I'm not too worried about the Yankees' approach. What I am worried about is the fact that, is this the right move for them? Is this the right path forward? Because right now, I look at this lineup offensively. I think maybe Jazz Chisholm Jr. can be a power guy. Cody Bellinger might still have a little bit of pop left. But you're going to have to rely on a lot of these younger guys like Volpe and Dominguez to contribute to that success offensively as well. Because obviously you know what Judge can do. But now it's going to be about this younger generation stepping up and adding potency to the batting order. Because I love that this Yankees team analyzed its loss in the World Series and said we have to get better defensively and went out and made those signings. But you have to think that these are the Bronx Bombers. and they win with power. So where will the runs come from? That's the only worry to me. But I do feel that the Yankees could be a team that fall off this list because they seem like a team primed and ready to go to win a World Series, if you know what I mean. So the Yankees, I'm kind of on the fence about because I'm not necessarily certain this strategy will work out, but I am tempted by it because the Yankees realizing they don't necessarily have to be the quote-unquote Bronx Bombers all the time necessarily. They realize that what these young players might need is a little bit of defensive help. And that's fine by me. But it has to translate into wins and ultimately World Series titles eventually. But maybe not as immediately as some of these teams with championship windows closing rapidly coming up that really, really have a necessity to win. Like the Padres. Actually, the Braves. The Braves are a team that I feel definitely need to win now, before it's too late in the NL East. And they just need to hope that Ronald Acuna Jr. is healthy for most of this. Because if he isn't, then they are still a very solid team. Even one of the best teams in baseball without him. But he is the lifeblood, the heartbeat of this roster. And so I feel that this Braves team are a team that really are centered around the health of all their best players. Because I feel that there could start to be a little bit of regression to the older guys in this lineup. Maybe guys like Arcia, maybe guys like Olsen might have down years. They're still having incredible down years, but that might change down the line once the NL East really is perhaps the most competitive division in all of baseball. But the reason that the Braves are a little bit higher than the Yankees is because, to me, they're all in on these guys. And if they don't deliver, then that's where I feel there might have to be a little bit of a rebrand of Atlanta. And so they have to rely on that nucleus of one specific player to sustain them. And really sustain this locker, most importantly, because if not, they can lose ground in the NL East very quickly in the short and long-term future. So they have to find a way to break through and win a World Series. But let's talk with the other NL East team on this list, the final NL East team on this list, the New York Mets. And it's one simple thing that has changed the dynamic of how we're going to view the Mets. Juan Soto. Because if Juan Soto weren't a Met, this would be a very promising team who overachieved last year. But I still think expectations would be tempered in Queens. Just because they are a talented roster and Steve Cohen has the money, but they wouldn't have had a high-profile guy. Because Lindor, yes, is on a long contract, and he is seen as one of the vocal leaders of this team. But Juan Soto alters the entire perception, not just of this team, but of the clubhouse, the player dynamics, the power dynamics of this team. So if this experiment doesn't work, and the young players who you also are investing in don't live up to their standard, then that's where you could run into trouble. That's why they are very high on this list, because it's not just about Juan Soto and the power dynamics he is bringing. It's about the young guys as well, because Juan Soto is only part of the plan, right? The plan that both Cohen and Stearns have is not just to sign high-profile signings off the street. Their job is to ensure that the younger players don't feel left out either, and that they have a place to grow and mature as well, just to add a little bit more depth to this Mets roster. So that's why, though, I'm a little tentative to put them number one, just because I feel that Juan Soto wants to be here. But it's the younger players who I'm a little less concerned about, if you want to be completely blunt with me. Because we've already seen some young players struggle for the Mets. And I'm not necessarily certain it's to this extent where they're not going to contribute because they're going to be given chances to. We're already seeing Brett Beatty come alive in spring training. But what I am concerned about is this new power dynamic going to feel like something where the younger guys feel left out and Juan Soto, Lindor, and Alonso are the headliners. So that's where I'm kind of concerned with the Mets, and that's why this is Ohio Nuts, but not as high as the Milwaukee Brewers. This is a team whose championship window, let's be honest, is rapidly closing. But with this new younger crop of players, they actually truly believe that they might have a shot to still contend, at the very least in the NL Central. Because let's be real, the NL Central's not necessarily going to be the best division. But the Milwaukee Brewers are starting to become a team where you just become too frustrated by them. And no matter what they do, whether it be invest in their farm system, try and bolster your rotation, and things of that magnitude, they just don't feel like they're gaining ground. They feel like they're in this purgatory of contending for the wild card and getting eliminated in the wild card. But there is hope in the youth. Terang and Frelick can be incredible players. Myers can be an incredible pitcher. So they have guys, Churio, really growing into his own last season. They have guys who can do what is needed to get this team to the promised land. But I don't know in this loaded NL it's going to be sustainable enough over the next 5 to 10 years. So we're going to have to see with Milwaukee Brewers, but that's why they top this list, because they've already disappointed thus far over the past decade or so. And now, with new players, they're going to have to retry all over again. So we're going to see if Milwaukee can do that, but they'll just about do it for this segment. Coming next, we're going to be transitioning over to the NHL, my final ever power rankings. Who will sit atop them right after this short break.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely...
Hello everyone, welcome back into the GSMC Dead Ball Sports Podcast. And for our third segment of today's show, we're going to be talking about my final ever NHL Power Rankings. And out of this top 5, is a very solid top 5 for my final ever NHL Power Rankings. It's going to be an incredible stretch run in the NHL where contenders can become pretenders, pretenders can become contenders. But I think that we finally found a pretty concrete top 5 in the NHL. And I think all 5 of these teams are capable of breaking through and winning the Stanley Cup this year. So without further ado, let's just jump right into it, starting off at number 5, a team that definitely very well could be a bit higher in these rankings, but I think are just a solid, well-rounded team, and someone had to be number 5, is how I think about it. So without further ado, number 5 is, the Vegas Golden Knights. I thought I had a graphic for that, and I kind of foreshadowed in my last segment, but we'll go with it anyways. The Vegas Golden Knights. And you can convince me, this Vegas Golden Knights team could be as high as 4 or 3. But the thing about Vegas is that someone, like I said, has to be number 5. And Vegas, to me, is a solid team, but I'm uncertain now of how to view them in the landscape of the NHL, because so many teams have come out of the woodworks this season and shocked us all to the point where, yes, I could see Vegas lifting the Stanley Cup when it's all said and done. We also want to respect the teams that have overachieved this season. So Vegas, the ultimate overachievers, find themselves at number 5 in this list. But you can convince me if you think that they could be higher. But in terms of how high they can be, they could be ahead of my 4th place team because they're currently projected to have more points when all is said and done at the end of the regular season than my number 4 squad. And Jack Eichel is a pure talent. I really love Jack Eichel, and I followed him throughout his career on my multiple fantasy hockey teams. And he is an MVP with 69 points in 56 games. But if you want to nitpick really, and you want to find an area or a player where Vegas needs them to step up, William Karlsson. He has struggled this season with injury, but he hasn't really been as impactful as we thought he was. He is one of the elder statesmen on this team, though, but he only has 7 goals in 38 games, and he scored 30 and 70 last year for comparison. And he is someone that I feel needs to be reworked back into the squad, but ultimately you cannot nitpick a very solid Las Vegas Golden Knights team, strong in almost every single area of the ice. So I really just think that this team got the short end of the stick in the rankings. But at number 4, you definitely could make a case for this team to go down a little bit. Lost 3 straight games after the All-Star break. The Edmonton Oilers. Now, when the Edmonton Oilers are on, they look every part the Stanley Cup contender they deserve to be called. But I think these last few games, it's become starkly clear that their worst makes them look like one of the worst teams in the NHL, one of the 12 perhaps worst teams in the NHL. But I do want to highlight potentially the most glaring stat that gives me pause about Edmonton, even as a fan. Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl, let's be clear, are two of the biggest stars in all of hockey, generational talents. But they have combined for 158 points this season. And in fact, their 20 power play goals are more than the rest of the roster combined. That has to worry you if you want more balance out of the Stanley Cup contender. But I am on the side of believing that the Oilers team are more than the sum of just Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl. They have the talent. It just needs to find its way. And yes, they're in this 3-game rut, but I think that they will ultimately get back to where we think they can be and ultimately contend for that Stanley Cup and maybe even finally break through after last season's failure. But I do want to see more out of Evan Bouchard. He is seen as one of the best offensive defensemen in the game, especially for Edmonton, the way he can contribute with his Bouch bombs that were made famous in the playoffs last year. But I just need to see more production out of him after a disappointing start to the season and after last year and his incredible rookie campaign. He has 44 points in 57 games, and it's not necessarily the worst tally he could possibly have, but he had 82 and 81, more than a goal a game last year. So Evan Bouchard is definitely someone who I really want to see step up, especially in the stretch run, because I think that if he amps himself up ahead of the postseason, he's going to be a beast. He's going to be tough to stop in that postseason setting. But Edmonton right now are 4. You could definitely make a case for them to be at the very lowest 5 or 6 potentially. But I am giving them the benefit of the doubt just because of the 2 incredible players we know they have. Then at number 3, let's talk about the incredible surge of the Dallas Stars, a team that we were a little bit worried about at the start of the season, but have completely altered their trajectory. And we know how good this Dallas Stars team is. But we also know how injured they have been over the past several games. Tyler Seguin, out for the rest of the regular season. Marchment has been limited to 39 games thus far, and now Heiskanen's a month-to-month guy. And Miro Heiskanen is one of the best in terms of minutes defensemen out there. So this team is still very talented. They have the 3rd best point percentage in the NHL through 57 games. But because of the fact that some of the top teams we haven't talked about yet have just been better than them, in the standings at the very least, we often forget about how fantastic the Stars have performed, even with all the injuries to their squad. But now we have to call into question who's going to step up for this Stars lineup. And the one player I'm thinking about after an incredible Four Nations face-off for him, Thomas Harley, because that performance in the Four Nations face-off was the definition of stepping up for his country. I believe he stepped in to replace Josh Morrissey over the last couple of games in that tournament. He performed admirably. So Thomas Harley loses one of his line mates, one of his best defenseman buddies perhaps, in Miro Heiskanen. So now he ultimately is the guy who's going to have to shore up this team defensively. And I really think that he is ultimately capable of it. Even at 23 years old, what he did for Team Canada in that tournament can replicate itself in an NHL setting. Whether or not it's going to be in the postseason, I don't know, but they might just need it for the stretch run in this regular season to keep up with some of the top teams in the league we haven't mentioned. But I truly believe that this Dallas Stars team is kind of underappreciated just because of the rapid improvement of several teams around them, both in the Eastern and Western Conference, who we're about to get into. My number 2 team, the Washington Capitals, who really saw them coming this season. I mean, I could have justified potentially a wild card spot just because of all the interesting moves they made, but it really had to rely on a village for the Capitals to be seen as potentially the number 1 team or the number 2 team in the NHL right now. And they don't get enough respect, in my opinion, as a Stanley Cup contender, because a lot of people are still a little bit wary about how they got there. But the top of the league in points percentage, and as well as goals for and against. And most importantly, top 10 in power play and the penalty kill as well. This has been an incredible team effort to get to where they are right now. So kudos to the Washington Capitals. They have 8 players this season with 38 or more points. Absolutely incredible. Alex Ovechkin, almost there in his chase for greatness, or the great one's record, so to speak. Pierre-Luc Dubois, incredible season from the journeyman, a comeback player of the year contender, and then a young guy in Alexei Protas having a breakout season at 24 years of age. So ultimately a ton of contributors up and down the ice for this Washington Capitals team. But I have to be nitpicky because this was one of their biggest signings of this past offseason, and he hasn't necessarily been the guy to contribute for them. I'm talking about Andrew Mangiapane, an incredible role player in his time with Calgary. A lot of people around the league thought this would be an astute signing for the Washington Capitals. It still could. There's a chance in the playoffs to be a hero for them, but at least this season, he only has 11 goals and 9 assists with only 3 points in his past 14 games. So I really think that he needs to step up to justify them splashing the cash on him, because he was seen as someone who could bolster this offense. But ultimately, everyone in this top 5 is looking up at the number 1 team in the Winnipeg Jets. And it's not just Connor Hellebuck in goal. We've already talked about swimmingly. He's playing an MVP level caliber in net. He might ultimately win both the Vezina and the Hart Trophy this season. But it's guys like Gabe Vilardi, Mark Scheifele, and Kyle Connor, the veterans of this team, having 30 power play goals combined in this squad. This offense has really come alive this season, especially the power play. It's remained north of 30% all season long in terms of success rate. And these guys, even though they're grizzled veterans in the league and have been with the Jets for forever, haven't really seen this level of contention but still remain loyal to this team, now having a chance to have their success bear fruit in the league is really incredible to behold. But I do feel that one player has been a veteran in the league as well, more of a journeyman, has not necessarily translated to this Jets team as well, and that's Josh Morrissey. Josh Morrissey obviously did not play very much in the Four Nations faceoff, I believe, due to injury, and he has, for the most part, had a very strong season. He has been their ice time leader overall, but I just feel when you compare him to some of the other guys in the squad, when you compare their even strength stats, Morrissey isn't necessarily producing as much as you would like. So I do believe that with that nucleus of Vilardi, Scheifele, and Connor, they should be excellent in the postseason as well. And Connor Hellebuck playing as well as he has in net this season. But Morrissey has truly been the disappointment for them this season. But ultimately, that has been my final ever NHL Power Rankings with the GSMC Sports Network. And coming up next, we preview a big game this weekend in the NBA. It's Cavs Celtics, two of the East's best, the top two, their final showdown, when we come back after this short break.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts.
Hello everyone and welcome back into the GSMC Dead Ball Sports Podcast. And for our fourth segment of today's show, we're in the home stretch of my GSMC career. We're going to be previewing a big game in the Eastern Conference, the fourth and final showdown of the season series between the Cleveland Cavaliers and the Boston Celtics, taking place tomorrow night, I believe, at TD Garden. Now, these two teams clearly are the beasts of the East. The Cleveland Cavaliers, an incredible offseason fueled by astute signings, the maturation of certain players already established in their squad, like Darius Garland, like Evan Mobley, has led them to be one of the most balanced teams in terms of rotation in the NBA this season, and has led them to the NBA's best record thus far. And the Boston Celtics, defending champs, coming into the season looking to make a stamp on the Eastern Conference for the next several years. Their championship window wide open, facing some roadblocks though early. Porzingis injured for most of the campaign, facing a lot of injuries in fact. Brown, Holiday, even Tatum throughout the season, still have the NBA's second best record at the very least in the East. But in terms of how the series now looks, the Cleveland Cavaliers just want to get to the finish line, number one, in the Eastern Conference. And they would deserve that number one spot. But the Boston Celtics are the team in the East, to me, that really has the ultimate chance to knock them down a peg. And I know a lot of people are saying, well, they still have a lot of things to tweak. There are still problems with their superstars. I don't buy into any of that. My humble opinion with the Celtics team is that on their day, they can beat anyone. And it may not happen as much in the regular season as you would like, but I guarantee you, in the playoffs, they're going to be on fire. And so, that's why this matchup to me may not seem as important as a lot of people think, but in my mind, it's the only way for the Celtics to catch the Cavs, and that's why I'm presenting it. Because the Celtics are, 6.5 games back now. They had that bizarre loss to the Pistons a couple nights ago. And Cleveland is an 8-straight win streak after the All-Star break. So, ultimately, you're going to have a Celtics team who had a baffling loss coming back home and going against the Cavs team who's red hot. But ultimately, why I think the Celtics can still be competitive in this game at the very least is because they lead the season series, and I think that the Cavs are a team that you need to go toe-to-toe with. And when you go toe-to-toe with the Cavs, that's where maybe you pull out a win. In all three of these games, if I remember correctly, they were all very close. They were all determined by a couple of plays swinging one team's way. So that's how I feel this game is going to be. But then, if you look at potential, say, Eastern Conference Finals match between these two teams, that's where I feel longevity is going to matter. And so, if I'm the Celtics, I wouldn't necessarily be too worried about seeding, but I do want to win this game just to show Cleveland that in a postseason setting, this could very well happen again. And over a 7-game period, on every other night, it's going to lead to you tiring a little bit more. It's going to lead to questions about your rotation depth. And thus, it's going to be much harder in that setting to beat us again because they have that one win over them this season. But when it gets to the postseason, it's a different animal entirely. So that's why this game, in my opinion, holds so much magnitude. Because if the Cavs win, and we ultimately get this series as an Eastern Conference Finals, semifinals, what have you, it proves that they can go toe-to-toe with each other. And it proves that Cleveland is deep enough to challenge the Celtics every other night in a 7-game series. But right now, the Celtics win this game. Even if they don't go on and reel off enough wins to ultimately be the number 1 seed in the Eastern Conference and have Cleveland lose X amount of games to fall to second, I still think that it's a notice to the league that the team to look out for in the East isn't just Cleveland, it's Boston. They're still the top dogs. And comparing this to, say, what could happen in the Western Conference, I feel both of these teams are set up for success in the NBA Finals as well. Because, let's face it, even though Cleveland would be in that setting for the first ever time, they're deep enough to challenge any team that could come out of the West. And I guarantee you that there are several teams in the West that are going to have a lot of questions asked of them when they get to the NBA Finals. If the Thunder, are they too young? Is it their year right now? For, say, the Nuggets, will Jokic have to carry them to the championship much like he did a couple of years ago again? If it's the Rockets, same thing with the Thunder, except on a much grander scale. If it's the Lakers, yeah, they can score on you, but will they defend you enough to keep you down for a 7-game series, nonetheless? And the Celtics, they're the reigning champs. They hold a lot of weight in the postseason, no matter who they face. And so, that's why, when we compare this regular season series to the postseason series, it's either going to be a lot closer than we expect, or one team's going to take a stranglehold of that postseason series, if it should happen. So, for this 4th and final showdown, what I want to learn about both teams is this. For the Cavaliers, to start off with, can you go into TD Garden, disrupt the rhythm of the Celtics team, and most importantly, prove that you're a lot deeper than them by going, say, 8 to 10 deep and throwing out a lot of different looks at them and really challenge them toe-to-toe to match you, outscore you. And then if I'm the Celtics, I have to rely on the formula that was set forth last season. They won games with the team mentality. They won games by 3-point shooting well. They won games ultimately because no one star was greater than the other. And so, if they put forth a complete performance against Cleveland at home and prove they're not shaken by them on their home court, that says a lot. It speaks volumes, even if it's only one game in the chase for the 1 seed. Let's talk about the 1 seed most importantly, because I'm going to pull up the Eastern Conference standings here and show you how potentially unimportant being the 1 seed could be. So let's do this experiment here. Pulling up the Eastern Conference standings because I'm actually a little bit more unfamiliar with the Eastern Conference over the Western Conference, just because there's a lot more teams that you have to know in the Western Conference. So right now, as it stands, the Cavs would face any one of, I believe, in the play-in, the Heat, the Hawks, the Bulls, and the Nets, I believe, would get into the play-in tournament. The Celtics right now will be faced against the Magic, a team that defensively can hurt you on any given night. So, ultimately, it would be no real challenge, in my opinion, for either team going up against those two squads. But, let's say, down the line, a team like Indiana or Milwaukee starts to play well on the stretch in the regular season. Maybe even the Knicks get rolling, even though they're 0-7, and I believe 0-4 against both the Cavs and the Celtics this season. Here's why that could be a concern. Because let's say it's the Eastern Conference quarterfinals, and the Cavs are matched up against the Pacers or Bucks, and the Celtics are matched up against the other team. To me, that series could go a little bit longer than people might think. And if it does, that could call into question both of these teams' depth, which to me is the greatest X factor in their separation. So, if, say, the Cavs get into a battle in the Eastern Conference quarterfinals with the Pacers or Bucks, and so do the Celtics with the other team, then for potential semi or finals matchup, that's going to call into question how deep you really are. And if, to me, it were the Celtics who got pushed more, I would actually be a bit more concerned than it would be with the Bucks. Just because the Celtics have a more concrete strategy that's a little bit more boom or bust than Cleveland. Because Cleveland's strategy is that they are deep. Is that they can throw a lot of different looks at you. Whereas the Celtics strategy is to shoot the lights out and try and put up as many 3-point shots and win the math game. So, to me, that strategy could be a little bit more ineffectual if they get a little bit knocked down a peg in the first couple of rounds of the postseason. But let's get back to this fourth and final showdown in the regular season, because the Celtics lead this season series 2-1. If the Celtics win, even if it's not as convincingly as you would like from them, it goes to show that the Celtics still have the ultimate strategy to win games in the NBA, and ultimately win games when it matters. But if the Cavs win, it's a knotted season series, and it gives you the blueprint as to how these two teams will game plan for that potential postseason matchup. If the Cavs win, it gives them all the impetus to get the 1 seed, build momentum, and go into all their series in the postseason amped and ready to go. If the Celtics win, it leaves a seed of doubt in your mind that 3 nights in June you could go into TD Garden and rattle the Celtics as the defending national champs in their home court. So this game holds a lot of magnitude in how I will be viewing that potential postseason series, because everything changes if the Celtics win this game, even if it's not as convincingly as a lot of people might like. If the Cavs win, it's game on, and they have the ball in their own court and hold the destiny of the Eastern Conference in their hands as well, as all things would run through Cleveland. So that's my message to this team in Cleveland. Don't let Boston, both the court and the team, get into your head. And if you don't, well, like I said, game on in the postseason. But let me know what you think in the comments about this fourth and final meeting between these teams in the regular season and a potential postseason matchup, what it could look like. Is coming up next. We talk about my favorite sport in the world to conclude my time here at the GSMC Sports Network, talking about a very important game in the top 6, Nottingham Forest and Man City, this weekend, right after this short break. And welcome back, everybody, into the final ever segment of my tenure here as a GSMC sports host. This is it, guys. This is my final segment, and I get to talk about my favorite sport in this final segment. Maybe two teams that I wouldn't expect to be talking about, both positively and negatively this time of year in the Premier League. Definitely not my two favorite teams in the world either, but still, it is something that I will cherish forever, being able to end my career here on a high by talking all things footy. So without further ado, let us preview a big top 6 clash in the Premier League between Nottingham Forest, the surprise team in this encounter, and Man City, the surprise team for all the wrong reasons in this encounter. In the first ever tie, Man City ultimately rolled out 3-0 winners, and it was a humdrum win for them. Nottingham Forest were not seen as a team that Man City would have to contend with, most definitely not for a top 6 place for that matter, or even a Champions League place. But, oh how the tables have turned, because both of these teams sit in a very tight race for the top 4. I do believe that City now have the upper hand in terms of points. I could be wrong, but who would have thought that this potentially meaningless game early on in the season would turn into a top 6 clash when these two teams met again. So kudos to Forest for being the surprise team of this Premier League season. But let's talk about what went wrong for Man City. 14 losses in 27 games in all competitions. Unheard of for a manager who does nothing but win. And if I'm Pep Guardiola in the board, at least I have a blueprint of getting back to where we know they can be. It has to be concerning that now you're starting to purchase in a bit more panicky way. And obviously in the summer, you'll have more opportunities to purchase more high-profile players than guys like Kusanov, Rais, and Gonzalez. But the fact that those were your 3 big signings in this window, and they're all young, unproven players, is a little bit worrying for how Man City's looking, not just for the short-term future, but for the long-term future. And now, all these high-profile players, yes, they might think about you, but they're thinking about teams that are right now winning in their respective leagues and winning in better manner, in better fashion. City are now a team that are struggling to beat these Premier League outfits, whether they're strong or not. A 1-0 win over a Spurs team that, yes, regained a little bit of momentum but are still in 13th place has to be embarrassing for you. So City right now are in a very weird place, an unheard of place in the Pep Guardiola era. Compare that to Nottingham Forest, and they're in 7th heaven. Under Nuno, a manager who obviously is not the most appealing in the Premier League, but still finds ways to win games. As a matter of fact, his Wolves managerial career has been one of the most impressive blueprints of how to keep a team up in the Premier League these past couple of years. Truly remarkable that he was able to bring Wolves to mid-table with his managerial skills. Now he's at Forest and he's doing a very similar thing. Very nearly relegated last year. They find themselves competing for Europe this year, and they've done it with a combination of a revitalized Chris Wood, a journeyman striker in the Premier League, and a defense that, yes, as of late has not been as rock solid as we've seen them, but still is more than some of its parts. Both Milenkovic and Murillo, outstanding seasons despite these past couple of weeks. But now, let's talk about the form these teams are in. Because even in that loss to Newcastle and in that goalless draw against Arsenal, which to me was a more impressive midweek result than City's 1-0 win over Spurs, in my opinion, between these two teams. In that Newcastle game, which I watched most of, Newcastle had their number in the first half, Nottingham Forest. Nothing went right for that Forest team. Errant passes, struggling to play out of the back, lacking directness, not being able to handle the speed of Willock, Izak, Gordon, Miley, Hall through the midfield, in a really incredible, impassioned performance from Newcastle in their home park, put them to the sword. Then the second half, we saw everything go Forest's way, and ultimately they did come up short in that game, and it saw Newcastle creep ever closer to them in the Premier League standings. But I took a lot away from that game, because Nottingham Forest could have been left for dead. We could have been saying, oh yeah, this is where their run at a top 4 spot ultimately ends. They look completely and utterly lifeless in this game. It's Newcastle at St. James's Park. They're not going to make this a game. And yet they did. And then go into midweek against an Arsenal side that, yes, have lost their luster. Most likely aren't going to be challenging Liverpool. To hold them to a goalless draw. Even though it's an Arsenal that lack a striker. Even though it's an Arsenal that must be a little bit bitter about where they stand in the Premier League title race. Even an Arsenal where Mikel Arteta is starting to get frustrated himself. And still an impressive result. Compare that to City, who at home against Liverpool look completely lifeless outside of the occasional Jeremy Doku bolt into the penalty box. They looked like a Sunday League team in that game. Nothing went their way. Every attack seemed fruitless. Even when Jeremy Doku was doing his best to create separation in the box, nothing came of it. And then transition into midweek where they were playing a Spurs side that, had a 4-1 win over Ipswich at the weekend, but only winning 1-0 gives me pause about how Man City project over the rest of the season as a top 4 contender. And here's the thing. I would be a lot more hopeful about Man City if other rivals for top 6 positioning would be underperforming. And some of them are. Bournemouth have started to struggle of late. Brighton, are a team that I feel are a true contender. And they have had fantastic results over the past couple of weeks. But I have to see how they hold up in the long run. Chelsea starting to decline. Fulham, how legitimate is their push for a top 6 spot? All of these teams are in unfamiliar territory, and yet it's City who find themselves lacking the ability to week in, week out dominate the competition as they have in recent years of the Pep Guardiola era. And yes, you can pinpoint a lot of things that have gone wrong. The age of the squad, how Pep is starting to view these players, how their January transfer window went, where they made the most signings, I believe, of any squad in top 6 across all the European leagues. But they're young guys who are unproven. And how that's going to translate in the summer transfer window, where if City somehow makes Europe, which I think they will, I don't know why I said somehow, but they will, but not convincingly, how is it going to impact certain players' decisions about where to go? So, if I'm City, I have to be thinking that, yes, we're the most experienced team in this top 6 fight, but now it's a different Premier League. Now there are more teams who understand the nuances of not just staying up, but competing for Europe. Brighton has done this very well over the past couple of years. Bournemouth is starting to do it, and they may start having more cash to spend in summer transfer windows as well. Fulham, another team, trying to splash the cash and playing very lively football. Nottingham Forest, the team you're facing this weekend, starting to get with a program in the Premier League a little bit more. So if I'm City, I have to be very worried. We haven't even mentioned, their financial troubles, which I won't mention because here at this show I don't want to get into finance and politics here. But I feel like this City team, even with all that experience, suddenly seem more vulnerable than ever in terms of how they project in this top 6 fight. And yes, they'll easily get it, but how convincingly is my question. And this game against Forest has suddenly turned into a game where potentially they could dominate this Forest team, because I don't necessarily think this Forest team are world beaters. They've had impressive results, but they've certainly also had very iffy results. That Newcastle result, a prime example at the very least in the first half. But it's still a game where City has its mindset altered a little bit, because now this is an opponent who you have to respect a lot more, because they themselves are competing for a top 4 place. So if City go into this thinking they'll just boat race this Forest team, they might have another thing coming, because this Forest team have shown and proven that they deserve to be in the running for a European place this season. And City, much less so, because even though they have the pedigree, the championships to back them up, they have not played like it this season, and they've truly and steadily declined, in my opinion, even though they sit in the top 4 as we speak. But this game now is truly a game about how the Premier League is going to look in the long-term future. If Forest can give this game a go and ultimately get a good result out of it, it will prove that a lot of these teams are starting to get the feel of playing in the Premier League. If City wins, then you start to expect them to have a stranglehold over this division. A little bit over this top 4 race, so to speak, not the division, because Liverpool's running away with it. So I view this game as very telling about the status of the Premier League, and that's why I wanted to present it to you guys. But in doing so, that will just about do it for this edition of the GSMC Dead Ball Sports Podcast, and with it, there goes my tenure as a GSMC podcast host. I really enjoy this experience. Thank you all for tuning in throughout my career, whether you started with me as a GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast host or have just recently found me with the Dead Ball Podcast. Thank you all for your kind support, and all I ask of you, if you continue to view shows around the network, is to support the guys left. A great group of guys, and I'm sure that the company will continue to hire great, knowledgeable people who will present you good content as well. But continue to tune in even as I'm leaving, because I truly appreciate what this network has done for me, and the guys left will truly appreciate all the support you give them as they wrap up their internships as well. But that will just about do it for today's edition of the GSMC Dead Ball Sports Podcast for the last time, but hopefully not for a lot of you if you follow my career. My name is Christopher Shepard. Thank you all for the time we spent together, but in the words of the great Robin Williams, over and out. Thank you all for the ride.